It's time, Fort Wayne. Your sports, your station. It's the Sports Rush with Brett Rump. Covering all the topics that hit a nerve here in the Summit City.
Clark, 11-yard touchdown.
Only on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Now here's your host, Brett Rump.
The greatest, most interesting, most important person of all time.
You are incredible. Over and one. Yeah, well, you're half right.
What is this, amateur hour?
This is going to be huge.
I think this is going to be our finest hour.
Just when I think you said the stupidest thing ever, you keep talking.
I think that's the worst thing I've ever heard.
That boy ain't right.
The simplest way to put it, I have problems.
Welcome to the alleged show.
Y'all ready for this?
Thank God it's...
It's Friday, gotta get down on Friday.
Oh, yeah. It's Friday, and it's hour 2 of the Sports Rush with Brett Rump right here on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Not Brett Rump with you for hour number 2 today. Today you've got Adam Lundy, normally the producer of this show, but today I'm going to be hanging out with you for hour number 2, taking you up to 6 o'clock as the Sports Rush is your daily local sports fix from 4 to 6. We've got a fantastic second hour coming up here for you today. We're going to be talking to Dylan Sinn of the Journal Gazette. He was at the Macedon women's basketball game last night in the quarterfinals of the Horizon League basketball tournament at the Gate Center. We're going to hear about that. We're also going to talk to Dylan about the Purdue Boilermakers basketball team. They're in action tonight. They're on the road for their last Big Ten regular season game, taking on the Illinois Fighting Illini, and we'll hear from him about that. We'll also talk to Dylan about the Indiana Hoosiers, and they've got a big game against Ohio State tomorrow at home at Assembly Hall that could determine a lot in regards to if Indiana makes it into the NCAA tournament this month. Also on the show later in the hour, we're going to be talking to Scott Agness of the Fieldhouse Files. The Indiana Pacers were in action last night down in Atlanta against the Atlanta Hawks. Without Tyrese Halliburton, did not play for the Pacers last night. And it was a competitive game. The Pacers kept it close. Were leading for a good portion of the game. But in the end, the Atlanta Hawks do get the win over the Indiana Pacers last night, 124-118. We'll be talking to Scott Agness about that in the second hour as well, as we take you up to 6 o'clock, where 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM brings you a Parkview Sports Medicine Game of the Week doubleheader. That's right. We've got 2 games for you tonight as we are in boys sectional play. And we've got 2 boys sectional semifinal games to bring you complete coverage of tonight. We're going to be in sectional 4A at the Wayne sectional. And tonight we're going to bring you coverage of the Huntington North Vikings taking on the Homestead Spartans at 6 o'clock. And at 7:30 p.m., we also bring you the game between the Southside Boys and the Wayne Generals. So that'll be a lot of fun. Looking forward to coverage of that coming up with Brett Rump. Pregame will start just before 6 o'clock right here on 1380 The Fan. Also in action tonight, taking a look at some of your other sectional pairings in 4A at Sectional 5 at Carroll. You've got the Snyder Panthers taking on the Carroll Boys at 6 o'clock. Then at 7:30 p.m. at Carroll, you've got the Northrop Bruins taking on the Northside Legends. Checking in on Class 3A at Sectional 20 at Northwood tonight at 6 o'clock. It's Wawasee taking on Tippecanoe Valley. And at 7:30 p.m., you've got Fairfield versus the Columbia City Eagles. Sectional 21 at Garrett tonight. It's Garrett versus Leo in Game 1 at 6 o'clock. And at 7:30, it's East Noble versus Blackhawk Christian. Sectional 22 in Class 3A at Belmont tonight. You've got New Haven versus Norwell at 6 o'clock p.m. And at 7:30 p.m., you've got Heritage versus Marion. And in Class 2A, Sectional 35 at Westview, you've got Westview versus Lakeland at 6 o'clock tonight. And at 7:30 p.m., you've got Eastside taking on Central Noble. Sectional 36 at South Adams in the semifinals at 6 o'clock p.m. tonight. It's Adams Central versus the Woodland Warriors. And at 7:30 p.m. at South Adams, it's the South Adams host Starfires taking on the Bishop Lures Knights. And in Class 1A, we've got a sectional in 52 at Fremont. It's Lakewood Park versus Bethany Christian at 6 o'clock p.m. And at 7:30 p.m., it's Canterbury taking on Lakeland Christian. So that is the boys' action for you tonight in high school boys sectional basketball sectional semifinals. Again, we will be at Wayne covering Huntington North versus Homestead at 6 o'clock. and Southside versus Wayne at 7:30. And a friendly reminder, we will be at the Waynedale Pizza Hut tonight after both games for the Parkview Sports Medicine High School Basketball postgame show. We'll be hanging out there till about 10:30 tonight, bringing you all of the final scores from boys sectional semifinals in and around the 260. And we'll be previewing our sectional championships that'll be taking place tomorrow night on Saturday night. So that'll be fun. Looking forward to that in the 6 o'clock hour. I mentioned that we're going to be talking to Scott Agness later in the hour about the Indiana Pacers. They fell last night to the Atlanta Hawks, 124-118. This was a game that the Pacers were playing without Tyrese Halliburton, and we'll find out from Scott Agness just how much his loss affected the Pacers last night. A lot of production from Pascal Siakam. He was 12 of 18 for 35 points. Also, Aaron Naismith continues his quality run of play, going 8 of 15 for the floor for 21 points. But other than that, there was just a little bit of a lack of production, particularly from the bench last night going up against the Atlanta Hawks. And there was just a big run by the Hawks in the third and the fourth. And it ended up being an Atlanta Hawks win. And unfortunately, it's not a back-to-back, but it is a 2-game series against the Atlanta Hawks here in the regular season. The Pacers will match up again with them tomorrow night. So we're going to be talking to Scott Agness about that here in the hour. We're also going to be catching up with Dylan Sinn about the Purdue-Fort Wayne women's basketball team, who last night in the Horizon League Championship quarterfinals defeated the Wright State Raiders at home at the Gate Center by a score of 64-50. But this was a game that was competitive. It was led by Wright State after the first quarter, 17-15. And it was still a close game at halftime, so we're going to hear about who stood out for Dylan Sinn in that game last night as the Purdue-Fort Wayne women do move on to the Horizon League Championship semifinals. That'll be in Indianapolis on Monday, where they're going to face Cleveland State. That game will tip off at 2:30 p.m. on Monday from Indianapolis. And 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM will be bringing you complete coverage of that game. So we look forward to rooting on the Mastodon women in that matchup on Monday. Also last night, the Purdue-Fort Wayne men's basketball team was in action in the Horizon League Men's Basketball Championship quarterfinals. They were on the road taking on the Youngstown State Penguins, and unfortunately, the Mastodons' season does come to an end here as they fell to Youngstown State 72-67. It was a 5-point final game. This was a game that took a huge rally just to make it that close in the second half from Purdue-Fort Wayne. It was tied 26-26 all at halftime. And then after that, coming out of halftime, it was a Youngstown State run that saw them, saw their lead balloon there in the second half. And, it looked like Purdue-Fort Wayne could have bowed out, could have easily, just called it quits and waved the white flag. But that is not what they did. They went on a furious run. They've got the game within 1 point there in the second half. It was a great run, and they really gave it their all, but they made it a 59-53 deficit with 2:29 remaining in the game. Quentin Morton-Robertson was getting hot there late. There was a lot of chances. There was even a chance to tie the game and send it to overtime with just a few seconds left, but it was a Jalen Jackson shot that did not fall for the Dons, and it ends up being the Youngstown State Penguins that'll head down to Indianapolis to take on their rivals in the semifinals down in Indy. Jalen Jackson had 19 points and a career-high 11 rebounds for his first career double-double in the game last night. But again, it just was not enough for the Dons as they could not put it together a big enough rally there in the second half to get up that 15-point lead that Youngstown State had accrued. Other than that, we're going to be talking to Scott Agness again about the Pacers here in the second hour. We're also going to be talking to Dylan Sinn about the Purdue Boilermakers taking on the Illinois Fighting Illini tonight, and we're going to talk about the game between Indiana and Ohio State and just how much rides on that game in regards to making it to the March tournament here for the men's basketball team. Couple other updates here before we take our first break and then get to Dylan Sinn taking a look at the Big Ten women's basketball tournament. There are 2 games in the quarterfinals that have already gone final today. The number 1 seeded USC women defeat the Indiana Hoosiers today by a score of 84-79. So it was a close game, but the number 1 seed does move on. other games that have gone final in the Big Ten women's quarterfinals. It was a 98-71 for the Michigan Wolverines over the 4th-seeded Maryland Terrapins. So that sets up a game between the USC Trojan women and the Michigan Wolverines tomorrow at 3 p.m. on Big Ten Network. So if you want to follow along with the Big Ten women's college basketball championship. Also checking in on the Purdue Fort Wayne baseball team. They are in the middle of the 6th in a matchup down at Tennessee Tech, and it is scoreless. So we'll be following along, seeing how our Purdue Fort Wayne Mastodons baseball team does, because I like to follow along with some of these, non-basketball teams as we get into baseball action here in the month of March. Well, that's a look at kind of a wrap-up of what we've gone on tomorrow, what we have later tonight, and what we have coming up in the second hour here of the Sports Rush here on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Our Parkview Sports Medicine text line is 260-447-8500 if you'd like to weigh in on anything Purdue, Indiana, Purdue Fort Wayne, and high school basketball. We welcome any and all comments at 260-447-8500. You are listening to the Sports Rush with Brett Rump. I'm Adam Lundy, filling in for Brett Rump today on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Producer Adam Lundy back here filling in for Brett Rump on the second hour of the Sports Rush today. The Fort Wayne Tin Caps are less than a month away from their opening day at Parkview Field. It's coming up on Friday, April 4th. And today the Fort Wayne Tin Caps unveiled. They released a new jersey, a new home jersey for the 2025 season. It's got a white jersey with a block word mark that's dark green and outlined in bright green. It looks fantastic, and if you want to take a look at that, you can check it out anywhere on the Tin Caps social medias or at tincaps.com. Our next guest that I'm bringing in, I brought him in today to talk a lot of basketball, but I'm sure we're going to be seeing him out at Parkview Field next month and beyond. It is Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette. Dylan, did you happen to see those new Tin Caps jerseys unveiled today?
I did. They were terrific. The Tin Caps continue to innovate, especially after last year when they had kind of their 15th anniversary jerseys with the gold trim. So continuing to keep things fresh out there at Parkview Field.
Absolutely. Looking forward to seeing you out at the ballpark starting next month. Going to be a lot of fun this season down at the ballpark. But I bring you on today because you were at the Hilliard Gates Sports Center last night covering the Purdue Fort Wayne women's basketball team taking on Wright State in the Horizon League Women's Championship quarterfinals. Purdue Fort Wayne pulls away with the win 64-50, but this was a game that Purdue Fort Wayne was behind by for a little bit of the first half. Tell me about how the first half went there for Purdue Fort Wayne.
Yeah, I mean, they were behind at the end of the first quarter, 17-15. Wright State made 4 3-pointers, and then they kind of traded baskets in the second quarter, and they didn't take the lead for good until very, very late in the second quarter. So Maria Marquesano was not particularly happy with her team's intensity in the first half of that game. She said she told them very nicely at halftime they needed to be better, and they were. In the second half, they were much better, and they played the way they are capable of playing. For most of that second half, there were some blips in there, but generally speaking, they know they have to be better going forward, especially when they play Cleveland State on Monday in the semifinals, because that's a significant step up in competition.
Absolutely, and it's kind of a trend that we've unfortunately noticed with this women's team is that sometimes in these first quarters it's a little bit of a slow start, and that's definitely something that they're going to want to hammer out before they get to these semifinals against Cleveland State.
Yeah, absolutely. They can't get off to a poor start against Cleveland State because then you're chasing the game, and that's not the game you want to be in against that team specifically. So it's one of those things where there is going to need to be, and I think there will be, quite frankly, there will need to be some more intensity in the early days of their early parts of that game. And I think it was kind of a little bit of a wake up call for them. It sounded like against Wright State in the first half, and now they know how they need to play in postseason play here, and they'll be ready to go.
Absolutely. We will be covering the Purdue Fort Wayne women's basketball team taking on Cleveland State at 2:30 on Monday right here on 1380 The Fan. Want to go ahead and switch over to some men's Big Ten basketball. Before we get to their upcoming games, I kind of want to jump back and look at their last games. For Purdue, it was a 100-71 thrashing of Ace Bailey and the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Just seemed like the Rutgers just didn't have the offensive power to compete with Purdue that night.
Well, which is funny because they do have two of the best players in college basketball on their team, and no, they couldn't compete with Purdue. Purdue's two guys, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, were better that night than Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. So a really, really impressive game. Smith and Lawyer make a combined 14 three-pointers. Obviously, that is not going to happen very often. It's one of those things where, well, why did they take 25 three-pointers in that game? It's because Rutgers wasn't running them off the line the way some other teams have. Rutgers just didn't play defense very well in that game, and Purdue is advantage of it. Braden Smith was terrific. He was. They were giving him his jump shot, and he was taking it and kind of carving up the defense. It was a masterpiece from Purdue in a way that kind of makes you feel a little bit better about them going forward after that 4-game losing streak.
That's exactly what my next question was going to be. How much confidence do you think this gives Purdue going into Big Ten tournament time, or does it kind of matter more about how this game against Illinois looks tonight first before we can talk about confidence levels going into the Big Ten tourney?
UCLA, which was a tough, grinded-out win. UCLA is a good team. And then you beat Rutgers, who just frankly isn't very good. They don't have it this year. And so now you go against, in a tough road environment, against Illinois, a team that on paper matches up pretty well with Purdue. They're long, they're athletic. That's the type of team that has given Purdue trouble in the past couple of years, including this year. And so can you go out and get a big win in a road environment, a very, very difficult road environment, and really feel good about yourself going into that Big Ten tournament? I think that's going to be, we're going to find out a lot about the capability of this Purdue team to make a run in this postseason with how they play in this game tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you're not a betting man, Dylan, but it's pretty interesting that Purdue comes in number 18th ranked in the AP poll. Illinois currently unranked, but as of right now, Illinois is sitting as a -4.5 favorite going into tonight's game. So that's some pretty interesting things of how Vegas thinks tonight could go.
No, I totally understand where Vegas is coming from on that, because some of Illinois' strengths are Purdue's weaknesses, right? Illinois has been very, very good on the glass the entire season, one of the best teams in the country in that area, and Purdue has struggled with it. We saw it even against Rutgers in the first half of that game before they turned it on. In the second half, Purdue struggled on the glass. They haven't been able to kind of close out possessions, and so I think that is going to be a huge key to this game. How good can they be on the boards? They're going to need a big game in that area from Caleb Furst, I think. He did great in the second half against Rutgers, 8 rebounds, 5 on the offensive end. He needs another type of those games tonight against Illinois if they're going to be in this one, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Going to switch over to the Indiana Hoosiers men's basketball side of things now before we get to the big game tomorrow against Ohio State. Looking back against their game against the Oregon Ducks, I don't think anybody is particularly surprised by the final score. But again, it is one of those games where Indiana had a chance to win late and then kind of let things slip away. Your thoughts on that last, end of the game against the Oregon Ducks and just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they had the lead with a minute and a half left, and I thought they defended that possession relatively well. When Jackson Shelstad for Oregon hit a 35-foot three-pointer, it was the end of the shot clock. Indiana hadn't fairly let the ball go into the paint the entire possession, and he just rose up and hit a shot. Now, Mike Woodson was not particularly happy with the way that they defended that possession, he said. He thought that they had kind of gotten sucked into the paint, and they weren't able to get back out to the shooter, even though it was a 35-foot three-pointer. So he disagrees with me, but I think it was pretty good defense. And I thought the biggest problem was that after that, the offense kind of let go of the rope a little bit. There were some possessions that weren't very good down the stretch of that game when they were only down 2 with a minute and a half to play, and they just kind of didn't do what they needed to do offensive execution-wise down the stretch. And it cost them a winnable game against a really good team on the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was another kind of poor game for Mackenzie Mbako, who we've seen kind of up and down to as this regular season comes for an end to the Hoosiers regular season. What do we got to do to get consistent production out of Mackenzie Mbako?
Yeah, it's tough because he's a guy who plays through his scoring, right? And that's not always a bad thing, but when he is not scoring, when his jumper isn't falling, he struggles to find ways to impact the game, right? And it's one of those things where for him, when his jumper is falling, when he's getting to the rim, when he's hitting three-pointers, he is an extraordinarily valuable player because then everything else around him elevates. But when he's not hitting his jumper, he really struggles to find other ways to contribute. And it's one of those things where you just kind of have to, if you're Mike Woodson, you have to feel it out. Is he hot? Is he cold? How long do I give him to find his rhythm before it's not going to happen? go away from him and maybe try again later. It really is like a balancing act with him.
It really is. Now looking ahead, the Indiana Hoosiers host the Ohio State Buckeyes tomorrow at Assembly Hall. And a lot's now been made of this game, especially with that loss to the Oregon Ducks out on the West Coast. Is this basically a win and you're in, lose and you're out situation for both teams in regards to the tournament here in March? How are you looking at this game?
Yeah, it certainly seems like it from kind of the way the brackets have kind of shaken out, at least the projections. Of course, we never know how the thing. Indiana's net ranking is pretty concerning still. Even with a win, it would be. But I do think that Indiana is probably in the tournament with a win in this game. And so it really makes it a huge game for Indiana. You're at home. This is a team you've beaten. It's a team that has the exact same record in the Big Ten as you. This is a take care of business moment. You should win this game if you are Indiana with the crowd behind you. Go out and get it done on senior day and send your guys out with an NCAA tournament berth and a win in their final game at Assembly Hall.
If they do get that win against Ohio State tomorrow, what are your thoughts on what they need to do in the tournament? Do they not need to even win any game at all, and they're still in, or do you still want them to win one in the Big Ten tourney at least?
It would be nice to get one. I think the thing is, if they win tomorrow, it's more likely that they play Oregon or Illinois in the first round, and so they would be the 8-9 game. And so I think even if you beat Ohio State but then lose to Oregon or Illinois in the first round, that loss is not going to be enough to knock you out of the field, would be my guess. So it would be nice to win. If you win, you probably play yourself out of the first four. You don't have to go to Dayton and play in the play-in game.
Right.
So it would probably take the win on Saturday and a win in the Big Ten tournament to do that if you're Indiana.
All right, lots to follow along here, but you're the man to cover it. Dylan Sinn, we'll look forward to your coverage of everything you've been covering with the Journal Gazette. What's your weekend looking like?
I will be in Bloomington tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. Not only is it Indiana-Ohio State, Indiana's first spring practice of the season for football is also tomorrow morning.
Oh, yeah.
For the basketball. I'll be there for that as well.
All right, we'll have fun getting a look at the preview of year 2 for Coach Sig and the Indiana football team down there for spring training and have an absolute blast at the game. Dylan, really appreciate you joining us. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me on, as always.
Awesome. That was Dylan from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette. Joining us here on the Sports Rush with Brett Rump with Adam Lundy, the producer, filling in here in the 5 o'clock hour. Coming up next here on the Sports Rush, we're going to bring in Scott Agness, who covers the Indiana Pacers for the Fieldhouse Files. We're going to find out what happened in last night's loss for the Indiana Pacers without Tyrese Halliburton down at Atlanta against the Atlanta Hawks. And we'll see what their second game against the Hawks tomorrow is going to be looking like. We'll talk about all that and more with Scott Agness when we come back right here on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Producer Adam Lundy filling in for Brett Rump in the second hour today as we get ready to bring you coverage of the 4A sectional semifinals in boys basketball tonight. We're going to be at Wayne taking on coverage of Huntington North and Homestead at 6 o'clock and Southside versus Wayne at 7:30. Some more basketball. Last night, the Indiana Pacers were in action down in Atlanta taking on my favorite player in the world, Trae Young, and the Atlanta Hawks. I say that sarcastically as a fan of the New York Knicks, but to talk about a team that I do respect as a quality rival in the National Basketball Association, the Indiana Pacers, I bring on Scott Agness from the Fieldhouse Files. He does fantastic coverage of the Indiana Pacers. And to talk about last night's game, I'm bringing him on now. Scott, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Adam. You had me there for a minute. I was ready for an explanation about Trae and this love.
You wanted to hear about how much I love Trae Young and all the fantastic theatrics he's done against my New York Knicks. I'm sure, you know,
Yep.
big favorite there. And looks like it was a case of Trae Young last night again for the Atlanta Hawks. But going into this game, no Tyrese Halliburton, no Benedict Mathurin. Only the second time this season the Pacers have played without Tyrese. But is that an excuse? Is that the reason they lost last night to the Hawks?
No, that's not a very good excuse in my opinion. It's a matter of this team. Just it was a tough one for them, and they didn't close well. I thought they were a little late in getting Pascal Siakam back in the game, and he had the hot hand of everyone last game. It's one of those scenarios where if this team's very comfortable and starring in their own roles, but when one thing is different, or in this case two, because Mathurin is out, it threw them off a little bit. I didn't like the fact Miles Turner scored 15 points, I think, in the first half, and then didn't get a shot up in the second half. There's little things like that. Sure, you missed Tyrese, but this team should be able to handle this tanking Hawks team without him.
Yeah, I agree. I'm reading here, they had a 92-82 lead in the late third quarter after an 11-0 run. Siakam was going off there, and I can attest to that. I do have Pascal Siakam on my NBA fantasy team, so I've appreciated his services all year. But then Atlanta outscored them 38-24 in the fourth quarter. Was this just a collapse of the Pacers' defense in the fourth, or was it just not getting to coverage? What happened there in the fourth?
Yeah, it starts with the defense, and especially points in the paint, where the Hawks had over 78 points. That's where they were primarily scoring. And then last night's game, Trae Young was more of a facilitator than he was a scorer. He topped 20 points, but he's been averaging 25 points versus the Pacers since he entered the league, 7 years ago. And so he found a way last game, just, hey, I'm going to distribute. So he put out 15 assists. Pacers weren't very good at their defensive coverages. And then on the other end, just had one of those times when they just couldn't score and struggled. And that's where referencing not getting Siakam in earlier, I would have liked to see that. And then the other thing, just, free throws, keeping the Hawks off the line, that's obviously a big deal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as far as field goal shooting goes in this game, I'm just seeing far too many made shots for too many members of the Atlanta Hawks. I'm looking at Okongwu, 7 of 8. Reece Sachet, 4 of 9. Dyson Daniels, 8 of 12. George Niang shot 10 of 15 from the floor last night, and he was so good. I think it was in the fourth quarter where he scored 12 of his 24. Yeah, I tell you what, man, when they play former Pacers, these guys always seem to go off. Yeah, I was just going to mention he was getting some revenge there against his former team, but again, it's just too much of good shooting from too many players on the opposite team.
100%. Yeah. I thought the Hawks were solid and the Pacers weren't not nearly good enough. It was the details, it was defensively, and then those pain points were costly ultimately.
Yeah, so they get that loss to the Atlanta Hawks, and what does the NBA say? What does Adam Silver and the schedule makers say? They say, hey, let's do it again on Saturday night. They're going to be playing the Atlanta Hawks again tomorrow night, and Tyrese Halliburton still a game-time decision. Benedict Mathurin still a game-time decision. Do you know anything about the status of those two guys?
Yeah, and there's actually one more of note to keep an eye on here. Aaron Nesmith was just added to the injury report. Now, he is probable, but I think he landed on that left hip a little hard the other night. We saw him diving for the ball and ultimately led to him getting a three-pointer at the top of the arc. I like that when the player's rewarded at the other end, but he is on the injury report. I suspect, Adam, that Mathurin will play. The team was kind of fully expecting him to play last night, but he just wasn't quite ready. And then Tyrese, I would suspect, I don't know this, I would suspect he will play in this one. But they're going to be ultra cautious with him moving forward. I'd be surprised maybe if he plays on back-to-backs, and they have a handful of them left the remainder of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to Aaron Nesmith, I thought that, losing him on Saturday would be kind of big because he's been having an absolutely fantastic stretch these last couple of games. I was actually down in Indianapolis for their game on Sunday, and Aaron Nesmith was quite the shooter in that game.
Yeah, he's a player that's was out for the first couple of months of the season. So what does that mean? He's the freshest player out there, and they ask for him to do so much. A lot of that was at times guarding Trae Young the other night. I mean, to keep him to 20 points, you're great with that. You don't want him to erupt for 45. And so he's been one of the great stories, I would say, over the last month and a half, Adam, in the way in which he plays both ends of the floor. And you don't expect or need really the score, and I view all of that as bonus. He's primarily in there to just be solid, to defend, and make the hustle play. So to get 16 points per game from him this year or more, that bodes very well for this team because they're going to really need him in the playoffs no matter who they play because of his defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, on Sunday he had 27 points, 56.3% from the field. So definitely been going off, definitely been a crucial part of the Pacers lineup, and hopefully he'll be able to play tomorrow night against the Atlanta Hawks. Looking ahead just a little bit at the NBA standings, the Pacers are kind of in a little bit of a logjam right around the 4 through 6 seed. Do you feel like they'll end up being right somewhere in that area, 4, 5, 6?
I do, yeah. Really right where they are seems about right, I think, in that 5th seed. Now, what will be noticed, two of the bigger games that they have upcoming is two games against Milwaukee, who's one game ahead of them essentially here moving forward. And right now, Milwaukee owns the tiebreaker because they're 2-0 in the season series. But it's imperative for the Pacers to try to get a better seed, that they win both of those games, one at home, one on the road. Here's the challenge, though, that certainly we're all keeping an eye on here, is that the Pacers will be on the second night of a back-to-back for both of those games, which makes it a little bit more taxing, a little bit more difficult. But right now, the Pacers are on a heavy road stretch just because the Big Ten women's tournament this week, the men's next week. But you think about Tuesday and the Bucks being in town, the one home game during that stretch is going to be one of the more important games that they've had this season because of it.
Yeah, definitely. So things are definitely shaping up here ahead of the playoffs, and looking forward to seeing where the Indiana Pacers kind of settle in and where they'll be playing. I don't know. Do you feel like they're as geared up for a deep playoff run as they were last season? I'm not trying to be an absolute hater here, but I'm not sure if I'm as convinced as their ability to compete with some of the top in the East this season.
No, it all comes down to injuries, and what did we see last night?
Yeah.
Jalen Brunson.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
You don't want to see that. Yeah, so if he's out 2 weeks or a month or 2 months, that changes the whole landscape. And I think the Pacers had a really strong season last night, but I could think a little of it could be Celtics fool's gold in that the teams that they faced were not 100% or not even close, actually. The Pacers, in their own right, weren't 100%. No Mathurin and Halliburton, well, it was probably like 60% here. But when you play Milwaukee in the first round and there's no Giannis, and then you keep progressing, and OG Anunoby, I think, in the Knicks missed a couple games at least. Yep. So to your question, no, I don't think they'll make a deep run. I think they should probably win one series. After that, it really is so matchup dependent.
Sure.
And everybody in the East is obviously trying to avoid the Celtics, but I'll tell you what, this Cavaliers team is a group to be reckoned with that you don't want to meet either. So I'd probably add them on that list as well as teams that you're trying to avoid in the postseason.
Yeah, you said it. This Cavaliers team is just scary as all get out. When they get offensively hot, it feels like they could just score 145 against you any given night. But yeah, you mentioned it. My guy Jalen Brunson going down last night for the Knicks. It's just looking out on the West Coast, man. It's just not fair. The Lakers, the rich get richer, and they get Luka Doncic, and he's just absolutely fantastic. Right. Where do you see the Lakers in the West before I let you go?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've probably, in terms of how they're playing, easily a top 5 team out in the Western Conference. You talk about an injury bug. How about Dallas?
Oh, my goodness.
Injuries. They're a team that seems to have bad news shared every single day. That's a whole radio show in its own right. But I think the Lakers are right there because, look, you go into any playoff series and you probably have the top 2 players in that series. Now, they don't have the depth as much. It's a miracle they were able to keep some of the players they were in that trade, like an Austin Reeves, for example. But I think they got to feel much better about where they're at because not only did they get Luka, who's not even in a peak yet, but as talented as Anthony Davis is, he's older and he's injury prone, and those things don't mix well, especially when you're leaning on a 40-year-old LeBron James who's defying age as a professional athlete.
Absolutely crazy. And just to point out, the Dallas just keeps getting worse. I just saw this across from Shams. Mavericks forward Olivier Maxence-Prosser has a serious right wrist injury and is expected to require season-ending surgery. So things just get worse and worse for the Mavericks. But Scott Agness, Fieldhouse Files, if you want to check out any of his fantastic coverage of the Indiana Pacers, also the Indiana Fever on there as well. Scott, thank you for joining me today on the Sports Rush.
Absolutely, Adam. Good to be on with you. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. That was Scott Agness, Fieldhouse Files, joining us here on the Sports Rush. We'll come back and wrap things up after this. You're listening to the Sports Rush with Brett Rump, with Adam Lundy filling in on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM. Adam Lundy wrapping things up here on the Sports Rush with Brett Rump as we get ready for coverage of the high school basketball boys sectional semifinals out at Wayne High School. At 6 o'clock, we've got Huntington North versus Homestead, and at 7:30, we've got Southside versus the Wayne boys. Big thanks to Scott Agness, who just joined me in the previous segment to talk about the Indiana Pacers and their game going on against the Atlanta Hawks tomorrow after they lost to the Atlanta Hawks last night. Also, big thanks to Dylan Sinn from the Fort Wayne Journal Gazette for talking to me about not only the Fort Wayne Tin Caps and their new uniforms coming up this season. He also talked to me about the Purdue-Fort Wayne women's basketball game last night that saw them move on to the semifinals on Monday, where we'll bring you complete coverage at 2:30 p.m. He also talked to me about the Indiana Hoosiers men's basketball team and their big game against Ohio State coming up tomorrow, and about Purdue's game tonight. Again, we'll be bringing you high school basketball coverage, but if you want to listen to Purdue at Illinois, we have coverage of that game on our sister station, 92.3 FM. That'll wrap things up here for the Sports Rush on a Friday. You've been listening to the Sports Rush with Adam Lundy filling in for Brett Rump on 1380 The Fan and 100.9 FM.